A phone call from an ex reveals renewed feelings as well as hesitations. I discuss this and more on today's episode. Welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I've found in my travels. Today, it is Short Story Tuesday, so I wanted to focus on an interesting short story that I found. And today's short story is all about ex relationships and China. I am referring to Hotline Girl by Chen, which was published in 2021 in her short story collection Land of Big Numbers. For those who don't know, Chen is a Chinese-American journalist writing for a number of outlets, including their current job, which seems to be the Wall Street Journal, but they have written for other outlets, including the New Yorker, among other places, and that seems to be their primary work. But they've also written just one book. It's this book. It's a short story collection. It has the Obama seal of approval, as he said he liked it, It's pretty solid. I think this might be the only thing that Chen ever writes that isn't in a newspaper or a journal of some sort. But there is an interesting sort of trend where journalists or people who don't normally write just write a short story collection, and that's all they ever write out. It's just an interesting observation. And that's pretty much all I know about Chen. Very interested in talking about this. I found this at my local library. Don't forget to patronize your local libraries. They might have short story collections that are written by acclaimed journalists or people like that. But without further ado, let's talk about Hotline Girl. I will do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we'll move on from there. So Hotline Girl focuses on Bayi. She is a call center rep for the satisfaction department in China. I don't know if the satisfaction department is a real department. I actually should have looked that up. That's my bad for not looking that up. But I do know that there are kind of departments like that in China. Her job is to answer phone calls, and that's the nature of her work and how she makes a living. But it's important to note that she wanted to be a singer in the past, but she seems to have given that up. And at the beginning of the story, she receives a phone call from a man named Keiju, who used to be her ex-boyfriend, or used to be her boyfriend, now her ex-boyfriend. He says he's been calling all day in order to reach her, and she's like, "You should not be calling here. If you need help with something, I can do that," and she hangs up on them. She also reveals, or the narrator reveals, that they had an abusive relationship. He was abusive to her. He was also cruel to animals and other people, a very jealous person, and she was happy to have ended it. And then over the next couple of days, she receives more calls from once Keiju is able to reach her, very insistent that they finally meet, and indeed she finally acquiesces, and they go out for some coffee at night. When she meets up with him, she discovers that he is missing an arm, which he says is because he was working in a factory that locked the doors and there was a fire, and he ended up getting hurt in the process. And so he's just missing an arm, and has decided to come back and check in on her. But he seems interested in restarting the relationship, but she puts a firm stop to it, saying that is not what she wants. And so they depart ways, and Bayi goes back to her apartment, her home, and that is where the story ends there. In terms of analysis, there's a fair bit to talk about with this story. One of the things that Chen writes about is the returned lover, the trope that you see in fiction, where someone comes back into your life that once was a big part of it. Bayi is forced to rethink her old relationships when Keiju shows up again out of the blue. It's been several months since they've talked, and Bayi has mostly been happy that he hasn't been there because he was kind of abusive. And so there was love there, but it was young love, maybe a sense of this is what love has to be. But Bayi will eventually realize that's not the only kind of love that there is. And what's more is he was abusive. He was mean. He just wasn't a pleasant person to be around, and that's not the kind of person that you want to form a long-term relationship with. So Bayi left. But what Chen is doing here is she's highlighting how loneliness can make you reevaluate all relationships and make them seem appealing, which is something that happens across cultures. Apparently, it happens in China too. Like maybe Bayi is thinking, oh, if I get together again with Keiju, I can stop being so lonely. I can feel better. Maybe this might work the second time around, even though it's possible that Keiju has not changed, and indeed he seems to be stalking Bayi rather than meeting up naturally. He's just kind of forcing this, which shows that he hasn't really turned over a new leaf. And at the end of the story, it does seem like she's kind of happy in having said no to Keiju. Which you could argue is maybe her sort of lying to herself. There does seem to be a melancholic nature of this story. But you could also argue that maybe she actually genuinely is happy that she stood up for herself. And in that way, maybe Chen is arguing that growth requires saying no. Growth requires not going back to your old ways or falling into bad habits that you've had in the past, and moving beyond those unfortunate things that have happened to you, which is what Bayi seems to be doing here. But I think you could make an argument either way about whether she's truly happy here. As I've been pointing out, another big theme of the story is loneliness. Bayi feels sad and lonely even while surrounded by others. There are billions of people in China. She's in a call center. She goes outside into the city and sees other people. She's not in want of company or potential company of other people, and yet she is still sad and lonely, partially due to the breakup that took place. Maybe she never really got over it, and having Keiju come back in her life might help break her out of this lonely funk that she seems to be in. But it also seems like there's a segmented culture in China that is contributing to this in some way. Maybe not as lonely and isolating as the individual cultures of the West, but just because a culture is collective does not mean everyone is necessarily included. And if you're part of a younger generation, it can be hard to sort of connect with others a lot of the time, especially because you might not have gotten a good example of how to do that, and that could be happening to China potentially. I do think that Chen does a good job of highlighting this in the call center setting, because Bayi, as well as the others, constantly receive phone calls, and Bayi acknowledges, or the narrator acknowledges, that many of these phone calls are from lonely people who just want to talk to the government, who just want to say hello, who just want somebody in their life and don't want to be lonely. So it is happening to others. Bayi is isolated and alone. And again, this doesn't seem limited to China. This is happening to Western cultures too, unfortunately. Maybe it's just part of a new trend where all this technology and all of these ways of connecting with others it's not necessarily making us more connected with others. And so, ultimately, Chen is presenting a very melancholic vision of China, where there's a lot of people, but there's very little connection actually happening. And the last thing, Chen talks about Chinese culture here, just noting a bunch of different things that give you some insight into what's going on in China at the time that she's writing this, which actually isn't that far off, only like 4 years at the time that I'm talking about this, but not much has probably changed since it's been written. But you see this with like the satisfaction department, which you don't see in America, but a government that is interested in helping its people might have a satisfaction department, or in a government that's interested in spying on its people might have something like that. There's labor violations, showing that China hasn't fully connected up to the modern day. Government control through the satisfaction department, but through other means as well. Billboard signs, just ways of sort of connecting people with others, but even though people aren't fully connected. And so it does sort of present China as a place of confusion, a place of uncertainty. In this time, it's coming into the modern age, but there's still things that might be holding it back, especially the authoritarian nature of China, with it not exactly holding fair elections, and there's not a lot of government transparency. But I do also think that there's a bias here by Chen. It's important to acknowledge who's writing this, and the person who's writing this is someone who works for the Wall Street Journal, a very conservative, very I would say state kind of media. It presents a very capitalist view of the world, and often has biases against China. I don't think Chen has those biases against China, but if you work for the Wall Street Journal, and you get continued work through there, then the Wall Street Journal there has to be some similarities between what you're writing or your thoughts in the world and what your employer views the world. Otherwise, you would just leave, presumably, especially if Chen can get writing elsewhere, can get work elsewhere. And so I do think there might be a little bit of a bias in this story that might be interested in presenting China in this way. Now, it's very well possible that China is this way, but it's still important to consider media narratives and how people want to portray China, especially when China is becoming a big competitor in trade and all of that. It's just something to consider, because you don't want to be led astray and believe that that China is this terrible place, because the government has tried to do that in the past as a means of sort of bringing democracy or making people feel angry or xenophobic even to people like that, which is what the Trump administration is doing now. But it's possible that Chinese culture is somewhat like this. But again, if you do not consider who is weaving certain narratives, you're bound to be led astray by people who are trying to spread propaganda. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Hotline Girl by Taiping Chen. The idea of spreading propaganda probably isn't as big in this story as you might think, but there are other stories in this collection that are very down and present a very troubled state of affairs in China. And so again, why is that? Is that because Chen has their own biases? Are they just presenting the biases that they come with in their work? Who's to really say? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I would love to hear from you, whether it be about China or even this story. If you have any thoughts on it, would love to hear from you. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that other people can find out about this short story, this author, or this collection if they don't already know, because it is a pretty solid collection, I would say. Very sad, so just be aware of that. But until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and China-based travels. Farewell.